When her ferocious pet gets covered in suds, the universe shifts. Facing officials determined to seize Keros for invasive testing, Avira and Stran unveil the unthinkable. The Raxid predator communicates, reasons, creates. As Karos performs the formal greeting ritual before the astonished council, centuries of classification crumble. A bath once sparked outrage. Now it sparks revolution and interspecies understanding across the galaxy. The glass stone house perched on the volcanic slopes of Orinia caught the first light of the twin suns. Morning rays filtered through the crystal facets, casting prismatic rainbows across the polished obsidian floors. Inside, Avira moved with practiced precision between her workstations, her jade-tinted skin glowing softly in the early light. She tucked a strand of luminescent silver hair behind her pointed ear as she examined plant samples under a molecular scanner. In the corner of her laboratory, sprawled across a depression in the floor specifically engineered to accommodate his massive form, Keros slumbered. The Raxid's enormous body rose and fell with each breath, his metallic purple fur catching the light. Even in sleep, his predatory nature was evident in the massive claws that had left permanent marks on the reinforced floor, and the slight exposure of razor-sharp teeth beneath his curled lip. Avira glanced at her pet with affection. Most Orinians thought her mad for keeping a Raxid, the apex predator of their world, as a companion. Standing at nearly twice her height when on all fours, with jaws powerful enough to crush volcanic rock, Keros represented everything that inspired fear in sentient beings across the galaxy. Yet in the 3 cycles since she'd rescued the orphaned cub from poachers, he had shown her nothing but loyalty and a surprisingly gentle demeanor. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. The communication console pulsed with an urgent message, bearing the seal of the Mars Council. Avira sighed, wiping her hands on her lab coat before accepting the transmission. Xenobiologist Avira, the automated message began. Your presence is requested at the Interplanetary Congress on Mars in 3 standard days. The topic concerns the ecological management of predatory species on frontier worlds, with specific focus on the ethical implications of current containment protocols. Avira's heart raced. This was the opportunity she had been hoping for, a chance to present her research on predator-environment symbiosis to the Council. For years, she had been collecting data that challenged the prevailing perception of apex predators as mere ecological dangers to be controlled. Her work could revolutionize conservation approaches across multiple worlds. But then, her gaze fell on Keros, and her excitement dimmed. Who would care for him while she was gone? The last 3 potential pet sitters had fled in terror upon merely seeing him. One had actually fainted when Keros yawned, revealing 3 rows of serrated teeth. Computations indicate your hesitation, xenobiologist. The message continued, as if sensing her reluctance. Be advised that your attendance is not optional. Your expertise has been specifically requested by the High Council. Avira's shoulders slumped. Acknowledged, she responded. I will make arrangements. The transmission ended, leaving her in silence broken only by Keros's deep, rumbling breaths. She approached her sleeping companion, carefully placing a hand on his massive shoulder. What am I going to do with you, my friend? She whispered. Keros's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but he continued to sleep. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of rejected applications. 3 more candidates for pet-sitting duties came and went, each more terrified than the last. The first, a burly Martian with an impressive resume of handling dangerous creatures, had backed away slowly when Keros merely lifted his head to observe the stranger. The second lasted 30 seconds before stammering excuses about an emergency elsewhere. The third didn't even make it through the front door. By midday, Avira was contemplating canceling her trip, regardless of the Council's insistence. She was feeding Keros his lunch, several 100 pounds of synthesized protein that approximated the native fauna he would hunt in the wild, when her communication console chimed again. Xenobiologist Avira, a deep, unfamiliar voice inquired when she answered. Yes, speaking. My name is Stran. I understand you're looking for someone to care for your companion while you attend the Interplanetary Congress. Avira raised an eyebrow. How did you hear about that? Word travels quickly when someone needs a specialist in my field. The voice replied with a hint of amusement. I'm an Earth-born creature handler. I've worked with everything from genetically restored dinosaurs to Jovian methane serpents. Avira hesitated. My companion is not your average pet. I've reviewed the species file on Raxids. Stran responded confidently. Fascinating creatures. I'd be honored to meet yours. Something in his tone, a genuine enthusiasm, rather than the usual clinical detachment, caught Avira's attention. Very well, she said finally. You can come by this afternoon for an introduction. When her doorbell chimed several hours later, Avira had nearly convinced herself that this Stran person would be like all the others, quick to arrive and quicker to leave. She opened the door to find a tall, human male with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of Earth's oceans. His dark hair was pulled back from a face marked with the lines of someone who smiled often. Xenobiologist Avira, he said, extending a hand in the human custom. Stran called her. Thank you for considering me. Avira shook his hand cautiously, noting the calluses that spoke of physical work. I should warn you before you come inside. Karos is a fully grown male Raxid, approximately 8 Earth years of age, with a particular fondness for crushing stones between his molars, if the scratch marks around your doorframe are any indication. Stran finished, his eyes twinkling. May I meet him? Surprised by his observational skills, Avira led him into the main living area, where Karos was now fully awake, his massive form commanding the center of the room. The Raxid's luminous yellow eyes fixed immediately on the stranger, and a low, warning growl emanated from deep in his chest. To Avira's astonishment, Stran showed no fear. Instead, he calmly dropped to one knee, lowered his gaze slightly, and extended a closed fist toward Karos, not close enough to touch, but as a gesture of introduction. Hello, magnificent one, he said softly. Your reputation precedes you. Karos stopped growling, his massive head tilting in apparent curiosity. He took a tentative step forward, his nostrils flaring as he scented the newcomer. He's assessing whether you're prey or threat, Avira explained, ready to intervene if necessary. Stran nodded without taking his eyes off Karos. A sensible precaution. I'd do the same in his position. After what seemed like an eternity, Karos huffed and settled back on his haunches, his posture relaxed but attentive. I believe we've reached an understanding, Stran said, slowly rising to his feet. He turned to Avira with a smile that transformed his entire face. He's even more impressive than the holovids suggest. Avira couldn't help but return his smile. You're the first candidate who hasn't run screaming. I've found that most creatures respond to respect rather than fear, Stran replied, his gaze returning to Karos with unmistakable admiration. Now, let's discuss his care requirements. He pulled out a small data pad. Diet, exercise routine, environmental needs. Wait, Avira interrupted, still processing the fact that this conversation was actually happening. You're really willing to stay here and look after him? Absolutely. Stran's expression was one of genuine enthusiasm. It would be a privilege. In fact, he paused, looking around the spacious living area. I'd like to suggest something that might seem unusual at first. Avira crossed her arms, intrigued despite her lingering skepticism. Go on. Stran set down his bag, and from it produced a small cylinder. With a touch, it expanded into a large, transparent container filled with an iridescent blue substance that seemed to shimmer with its own light. What is that? Avira asked, taking an instinctive step closer to Karos. A specialized cleaning solution, Stran explained. safe for all known species, including those with sensitive skin like Raxids. Avira's brow furrowed. Cleaning solution? For what purpose? Strand's expression remained entirely serious as he stated, I'm going to give Karos a bath. The words hung in the air for a moment before Avira's mouth fell open. You're going to... what? Give him a bath, Strand repeated calmly, as if suggesting nothing more unusual than taking a walk. Raxids in the wild use mineral springs to maintain their fur and skin health. In captivity, even in an excellent habitat like this, they lack access to those natural resources. Before Avira could form a coherent response, Strand activated another control on the container. It hummed softly before releasing a cloud of blue-tinted foam that expanded in the air. Are you insane? Avira finally managed, her voice rising. Karos has never had a bath. He's a predatory... Her words died in her throat as Strand directed the foam toward Karos, who watched the approaching bubbles with alert fascination. The foam settled gently on his purple fur, covering his massive shoulders in a crown of iridescent suds. Time seemed to stand still as Avira waited for the inevitable disaster, for Karos to lunge, to roar, to tear the presumptuous human limb from limb. But what happened instead defied all her expectations. Karos sniffed at the foam, his sensitive nose twitching. Then, to Avira's complete astonishment, he emitted a sound she had never heard before, a deep, resonant purr that seemed to vibrate through the entire room. The Raxid rolled onto his side, allowing more of the foam to settle on his underside. What is happening? Avira whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process the scene before her. Exactly what I expected, Strand replied, continuing to direct the foam until Karos was nearly covered in the shimmering substance. The solution contains minerals similar to those found in Aurinian volcanic springs. His species is instinctively drawn to them. He glanced at Avira, a hint of apology in his expression. I should have explained first, but sometimes seeing is more convincing than hearing. Avira watched in wonder as Karos writhed contentedly in the foam, his massive paws kneading the air. In all my years studying him, I've never seen this behavior, she admitted. That's because you've been observing him as a scientist, Strand said gently. I'm approaching him as a creature with needs beyond survival. He handed her a soft brush. Would you like to help? He might prefer your touch to mine for the first time. Still dazed, Avira took the brush and approached Karos. When she began to gently stroke his foam-covered flank, the purring intensified. The vibration traveled up her arm, strangely soothing. This is remarkable, she murmured, her initial shock giving way to scientific curiosity. The dermal response suggests a significant sensory pleasure pathway I hadn't identified before. Strand knelt beside her, demonstrating proper brushing technique. Not everything can be measured in a laboratory, he said. Some things need to be experienced. As they worked together to bathe the contented Raxid, Avira found herself stealing glances at Strand. His movements were confident, yet gentle. His expression one of complete focus on the task at hand. There was something compelling about a human who could approach the galaxy's most feared predator with such calm assurance. Where did you learn all this? She asked, as they rinsed Karos with a spray of clear water that Strand produced from another device. I grew up on a wildlife rehabilitation center on Earth, he explained. My parents specialized in species that others had given up on, the ones deemed too dangerous or too damaged to save. His eyes took on a distant look. I learned early that every creature has its own language of comfort and fear. The trick is learning to listen. By the time they finished, Karos's purple fur gleamed with a metallic luster that Avira had never seen before. The Raxid seemed rejuvenated, prancing around the room with an almost playful energy that belied his fearsome appearance. He looks... Avira searched for the right word. Happy, Strand supplied with a smile. He looks happy. The realization struck Avira with unexpected force. Had she, in all her careful scientific observation, missed something so fundamental about her companion's well-being? The thought was both humbling and exciting. If she had overlooked this aspect of Raxid behavior, what else might she discover with a fresh perspective? "I think," she said slowly, "that you are exactly the right person to care for Kairos while I'm away." Strand's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I was hoping you'd say that." As they discussed the practical details of Strand's stay, Avira found herself looking forward to the Congress with renewed enthusiasm. Not only would she present her research, but she would return with new questions to explore, questions inspired by a human who saw beyond the fearsome exterior of a predator to the complex creature beneath. What she couldn't have known was that this simple act, allowing a stranger to cover her ferocious pet in Suds, would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about Raxids, about humans, and about herself. The morning of Avira's departure arrived with a spectacular Aurinian sunrise, the twin suns casting amber and crimson streaks across the sky. She moved through her home, gathering last-minute items for her journey, her mind already rehearsing key points of her presentation. Kairos followed her from room to room, his massive form surprisingly agile as he navigated the space. I know," she murmured, pausing to scratch behind his ear frills. "I'll miss you too, but Strand will take good care of you." As if summoned by his name, the doorbell announced Strand's arrival. Avira opened the door to find him carrying several containers of equipment. "Early riser?" she asked, helping him with his load. "Force of habit," he replied with a smile. "Most creatures are at their most active at dawn and dusk. I have learned to adjust my schedule accordingly." Kairos approached, greeting Strand with what Avira could only describe as enthusiasm, a far cry from his usual wariness around strangers. "He remembers yesterday's bath," Strand observed, setting down his containers to greet the Raxid properly. "Remarkable memory capacity." "Among other remarkable capacities," Avira agreed. She hesitated before adding, "There's something I should show you before I leave." She led Strand to her research station and activated a holographic display. "These are brain scans of Kairos compared to wild Raxids." Strand studied the images with evident interest. The neural pathways in Kairos's prefrontal cortex analog are significantly more developed. Avira nodded, impressed by his quick assessment. "Exactly. I believe it's the result of sustained interaction with a sentient species, namely, me. It suggests cognitive plasticity far beyond what's been documented." "You're saying he's evolving intelligence through association?" "I'm suggesting it's a possibility," Avira corrected carefully. "But my research in this area isn't officially sanctioned. The Council's position is that predatory species should be studied primarily for ecological management, not cognitive development." Understanding dawned on Strand's face. "That's why this Congress is so important to you. You want to change the paradigm." "I want to present evidence that forces them to reconsider," Avira confirmed. "But until then?" She glanced meaningfully at Kairos. "Your research remains our secret," Strand finished for her. "I understand." Avira felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you. There's a detailed care manual on the main console, including emergency protocols if the massive predator decides I'd make a tasty snack." Strand's eyes twinkled. "I think we'll be fine. We've already established a rapport." As if to prove his point, Kairos nudged Strand's hand with his massive muzzle, nearly knocking the human off balance. "See? He likes me," Strand laughed, regaining his footing. Avira couldn't help but smile at the unlikely pair, the Earth human and the Aurinian apex predator, already comfortable in each other's presence. "I'm beginning to think he has excellent judgment." With final instructions given and contact information exchanged, Avira prepared to leave for the spaceport. At the door, She turned back for one last look at her home. Stran stood beside Karos, one hand resting casually on the Raxid's shoulder, both watching her with what she could swear were identical expressions of reassurance. 3 days, she reminded them. Try not to redesign my entire laboratory while I'm gone. No promises, Stran called back with a grin. Karos has some excellent ideas about workspace efficiency. Laughing despite the unexpected pang of reluctance to leave. Avira stepped out into the Orinian morning, her mind already shifting to the challenge ahead. She had a council to convince and a paradigm to change. Everything else, including the strange flutter in her chest when Stran smiled, would have to wait. The journey to Mars passed uneventfully, giving Avira ample time to review her presentation and anticipate potential questions from the council. She was midway through a simulation of her response to criticism when her communication device pinged with a message from home. The video showed Stran sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a blissfully content Karos, who was stretched out on his side with all 4 massive paws in the air. Day 1 report, Stran announced cheerfully. Your companion has eaten well, completed 3 perimeter checks of the property, and as you can see, discovered the joy of belly rubs. He demonstrated, scratching the Raxid's exposed underside to produce that same resonant purr Avira had heard during the bath. We also made an interesting discovery, Stran continued, his expression shifting to one of scientific excitement that mirrored her own. Watch this. He produced a series of clicking sounds while making a specific gesture with his free hand. To Avira's amazement, Karos responded by mirroring the gesture with one massive paw and producing a similar sound. I think it's a form of mimetic communication, Stran explained, his eyes bright. He's been repeating several patterns I've introduced. I've started documenting the responses for you. Avira stared at the screen, her mind racing with implications. Mimetic behavior of this complexity suggested far more than simple conditioning. If Karos was deliberately imitating communication patterns, I'll send regular updates, Stran promised. Safe travels, xenobiologist. The message ended, leaving Avira both thrilled and unsettled. The evidence of Karos's cognitive abilities was exactly what she needed to strengthen her presentation, but it also meant her pet was developing even faster than she had realized. What other capabilities might emerge in her absence? She composed a quick response, thanking Stran for his care and asking him to document all such instances of mimetic behavior. Then, with renewed determination, she returned to her preparation. The stakes had just gotten higher. The Mars Council headquarters loomed before her, a massive structure of redstone and gleaming metal that housed the governing body responsible for interplanetary ecological policy. Avira straightened her formal attire, a flowing garment of Orinian design that complemented her jade skin, and entered the imposing building. The reception area was filled with representatives from dozens of worlds, their diverse physiologies and cultural markers creating a vibrant tapestry of galactic society. Avira scanned the crowd, recognizing several prominent xenobiologists whose work she had studied. Xenobiologist Avira, a small, multi-limbed Ganymede native, approached her, its translucent exoskeleton shifting colors as it moved. I am Administrative Assistant Plex. The preliminary session begins in 30 minutes. Your presentation is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Thank you, Assistant Plex, Avira replied with a respectful bow. Is there a preparation area where I can review my materials? Of course, follow me. As they moved through the crowded hall, Avira noticed several delegates watching her, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. Her work was controversial in some circles, particularly among those who advocated for stricter control of predatory species. The preparation room was blessedly quiet, equipped with holographic projectors and data terminals. Avira had just begun transferring her presentation when her communication device pinged again. Another message from Stran. This one showed Kairos performing a complex sequence of movements in response to Strand's hand signals, movements that mimicked the traditional greeting ritual of Orinian formal society. "He's learning at an extraordinary rate," Strand's voice narrated. "I've been recording all instances of successful communication. The pattern recognition abilities are far beyond anything in the official Raxid species profile." Avira's heart raced as she watched Kairos execute a perfect ceremonial bow, a gesture that required not only physical control, but an understanding of its social significance. "I believe what we're seeing is genuine cultural learning," Strand continued. "Not mere imitation, but comprehension." The implications were staggering. If Kairos could understand and participate in cultural rituals, the entire classification of Raxids as non-sentient predators would need to be reconsidered. Avira was about to respond when a notification flashed across her screen. A second message. This one marked with an urgent priority tag from the Orinian Ecological Survey. "Xenobiologist Avira," the official message began. "Irregularities have been detected in your research permissions. Inspector Harlan has been dispatched to your residence to conduct an immediate audit of all specimens and documentation. Cooperation is mandatory under Interplanetary Code Section 47B. Avira's blood ran cold. Inspector Harlan was notorious for his rigid adherence to regulations and his particular disdain for what he called anthropomorphic sentimentality toward predatory species. An audit could mean anything from a simple review of her paperwork to the confiscation of research subjects deemed improperly managed. Subjects like Kairos. With trembling fingers, she composed an emergency message to Strand, explaining the situation and urging caution. Inspector Harlan had the authority to seize Kairos for further study if he determined that the Raxid was being used for unauthorized research. "Whatever you do," she concluded, "don't let them take him." She sent the message, hoping it would reach Strand before Harlan arrived. Then, forcing her professional mask back into place, she returned to her presentation preparations. She had to maintain appearances here, while her heart raced with worry about what was happening light years away. The preliminary session was a blur of speeches and policy discussions. Avira contributed where appropriate, offering insights on ecological balance and predator-prey dynamics. But her mind was elsewhere. Every few minutes, she checked her communication device, hoping for word from Strand. When the session finally ended, she rushed back to her assigned quarters, only to find another message waiting, this one from Inspector Harlan himself. "Xenobiologist Avira," the stern-faced official began without preamble. "I am conducting a field audit of your research activities. Your human associate has been uncooperative regarding access to the Raxid specimen. Be advised that obstruction of an official inspection is grounds for immediate revocation of all research credentials. I expect your immediate intervention to resolve this situation." The message ended with a bureaucratic flourish, Harlan's official seal, and a citation of the relevant regulatory codes. Avira sank onto the edge of her bed, her mind racing. Strand was protecting Kairos, as she had asked. But at what cost? Harlan had the authority to not only confiscate Kairos, but to end her scientific career with a single report. Her device pinged again. "Strand!" Inspector Harlan arrived with 2 armed escorts. His message began, his usually calm face tight with tension. "They're demanding to take Kairos for standard examination procedures at the central laboratory. I've refused on grounds that transport would pose an undue stress risk to the subject." His eyes flashed with determination. "They're currently outside the perimeter, consulting with their superiors. I've initiated the security protocols you showed me, but I'm not sure how long they'll hold." In the background, Avira could see Kairos pacing, his massive body tense with agitation. The Raxid clearly sensed the threat, even if he didn't understand its nature. "I need your authorization to proceed with Plan Delta," Strand continued, using the codename they had established for emergency situations. "Without it, I'm not sure I can prevent them from taking him by force." Plan Delta. Avira closed her eyes briefly, weighing the consequences. It meant activating the hidden laboratory beneath her main facility, the place where she conducted her most sensitive research on Raxid cognition. It contained evidence that would vindicate her scientific claims, but could also be construed as violations of research protocols. "Authorization granted," she replied, after a moment's hesitation. "Access code, Raxid Cognition Theta 9, and Stran—" She paused, suddenly aware of how much she had come to trust this human she had known for barely 2 days. "Be careful, both of you." With that done, she faced her next challenge. She needed to return to Aurinia immediately. But leaving the Congress before her presentation would be seen as a direct affront to the Council. It could damage not only her reputation, but the very cause she was fighting for. A solution came to her in a flash of inspiration. She requested an emergency communication with the Congress chairperson, citing new research developments that required immediate attention. When the connection was established, she found herself facing Chairperson Lorne, a venerable Martian whose weathered face showed centuries of diplomatic service. "Xenobiologist Avira," Lorne greeted her with formal politeness. "This is highly irregular. I apologize for the unconventional request." "Chairperson," Avira began, choosing her words carefully. "A situation has arisen on Aurinia that directly impacts the research I am scheduled to present tomorrow. Inspector Harlan of the Ecological Survey is attempting to confiscate my primary research subject under questionable authority." Lorne's expression remained neutral, but she noted a slight narrowing of his eyes. "Inspector Harlan reports directly to this council. If he is acting in his official capacity—" "With respect, Chairperson," Avira interrupted, a dangerous breach of protocol that she immediately regretted but couldn't take back. "Harlan's actions appear to be preemptive. The very questions I intend to address in my presentation, regarding the cognitive capacity of predatory species and their ethical classification, are being prejudged through this intervention." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I am requesting either a postponement of my presentation until this matter can be resolved, or permission to present remotely from Aurinia, where I can ensure the integrity of my research data." Lorne was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying her with inscrutable intensity. "Your request suggests that your presentation contains material that might contradict current council policy. Science often challenges existing paradigms." "Chairperson," Avira replied, holding his gaze steadily. "Isn't that why the Congress exists? To ensure our policies evolve with our understanding?" A hint of what might have been approval flashed across Lorne's face. "You make a compelling argument, xenobiologist. I will grant you a conditional remote presentation slot. You will return to Aurinia and resolve this matter with Inspector Harlan. Tomorrow, at your scheduled time, you will present your findings via secure channel, with Inspector Harlan present to offer counterpoint." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than she had hoped for. "Thank you, Chairperson." "Do not thank me yet," Lorne cautioned. "If your research fails to justify this extraordinary accommodation, the consequences to your career will be significant." The communication ended, leaving Avira with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had permission to return home, but she had also raised the stakes of her presentation to potentially career-ending levels. Within the hour, she was aboard a priority transport vessel bound for Aurinia, her mind consumed with strategies for the confrontation to come. She could only hope that Stran had managed to keep Harlan at bay until she arrived. The transport touched down on Aurinia as the second sun was setting, casting long shadows across the volcanic landscape. Avira wasted no time, hiring a hover vehicle to take her directly to her remote residence. As they approached, she could see official vehicles parked outside her perimeter, sleek, government-issue transports that gleamed menacingly in the fading light. At the main entrance to her property stood 3 figures: Inspector Harlan, tall and rigid in his formal uniform, flanked by two security officers whose hands rested pointedly on their sidearms. "Stop here," she instructed her driver, deciding to approach on foot. Better to appear composed and cooperative than to arrive in a rush of obvious anxiety. As she walked toward the inspection team, the main door of her home opened, and Strand emerged. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his stance, a controlled readiness that reminded her that this human was more than just a gentle creature handler. "Inspector Harlan," she called, as she came within speaking distance, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I understand you've been waiting to conduct an audit." Harlan turned, his thin face settling into a frown of disapproval. "Xenobiologist Avira, your unexpected departure from the Congress is yet another irregularity in what appears to be a pattern of non-compliance." "On the contrary, Inspector," she replied smoothly. "Chairperson Lorne himself approved my return to facilitate your audit. I believe in full transparency in scientific endeavors." Something like suspicion flickered across Harlan's features. "Then perhaps you can explain why your assistant has denied us access to the Raxid specimen for a standard examination." Avira glanced at Strand, who met her gaze with a slight nod. He had held them off successfully, but the situation remained precarious. "My colleague was following established protocols for the care of sensitive subjects," she explained. "Raxids experience extreme stress when approached by unfamiliar individuals, particularly in groups. Such stress can trigger defensive responses that would endanger both the specimen and your team." "Convenient excuses," Harlan sniffed. "The Ecological Survey has received reports of unauthorized cognitive experiments being conducted on this creature, experiments that violate Section 12 of the Predatory Species Research Code." Avira maintained her composure with effort. "I assure you, Inspector, all my research is properly documented. If you'll allow me to access my systems, I can provide you with the necessary permits and protocols." Harlan's cold eyes studied her for a moment before he nodded curtly. "Very well. But be advised that we will conduct a complete inspection of the premises, including any secured areas." "Of course," Avira agreed, her mind racing ahead to what Harlan might find in her hidden laboratory if Strand had activated Plan Delta. "Shall we proceed inside?" The group moved toward the entrance, where Strand waited with an expression of careful neutrality. As they passed him, he gave Avira the briefest of signals, a slight touch to his wrist that told her he had successfully implemented her contingency plan. Inside, Karos was nowhere to be seen, which meant Strand had secured him in the reinforced habitat room, as per their emergency protocol. Harlan and his officers moved through the main laboratory with professional efficiency, scanning equipment and reviewing data files. "Where is the Raxid?" Harlan demanded after completing his initial sweep. "In his secure habitat," Avira replied. "As I mentioned, the presence of strangers can trigger stress responses. Would you like me to bring him out under controlled conditions?" Harlan's mouth tightened. "That won't be necessary. Our orders are to transport the specimen to the central laboratory for comprehensive testing." "Testing?" Avira echoed, her alarm rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "What kind of testing?" "Standard cognitive evaluation," Harlan replied dismissively. "And a full neural scan to determine if unauthorized modifications have been made." "Neural scan?" The words sent a chill through Avira's body. Such procedures were highly invasive and often resulted in permanent damage to the subject's brain. They were typically reserved for specimens that would not be returned to the wild or to their owners. "I must object, Inspector," she said, her voice hardening. "A neural scan would constitute unnecessary harm to a healthy specimen. The Interplanetary Code for Ethical Treatment clearly states, "The code makes exceptions for specimens involved in potential violations," Harlan interrupted. "Your objection is noted, but overruled." He turned to his officers. "Prepare the transport container and sedation equipment." Avira stepped forward, physically placing herself between Harlan and the corridor leading to Karos's habitat. "I cannot allow this. As the registered guardian of this Raxid, I am invoking the right of scientific appeal under Mars Council, Regulation 47C. Harlan's eyes narrowed dangerously. An appeal requires evidence of scientific merit that outweighs regulatory concerns. Do you have such evidence, xenobiologist? This was the moment Avira had been preparing for, and dreading. To protect Karos, she would need to reveal her most controversial research, the work that challenged fundamental assumptions about predatory species. Once revealed, there would be no going back. She glanced at Stran, who had moved to stand beside her in a clear show of support. His steady presence gave her the courage to take the final step. "Yes, Inspector," she said firmly. "I have such evidence, and I believe it will change everything we think we know about Raxids." Harlan's skepticism was evident, but the invocation of an official appeal process tied his hands, at least temporarily. "Very well. You have 1 hour to present your evidence before we proceed with the extraction." Avira nodded, then turned to Stran. "It's time for Demonstration Protocol Alpha." Understanding lit his eyes, and he moved quickly to the main console, entering a series of commands that activated the holographic display system throughout the room. "Inspector Harlan," Avira began, as the systems powered up. "What I'm about to show you represents 3 years of careful documentation. It suggests that Raxids are not merely predators, but possess cognitive and cultural capacities that would qualify them for protected status under the Sentient Species Conservation Act." Harlan's expression remained dismissive, but he gestured for her to continue. The first holographic display activated, showing a series of brain scans. "These are comparative neural maps of wild Raxids versus Karos," Avira explained, highlighting specific regions. "Note the development in areas associated with complex problem-solving, empathetic response, and symbolic thinking." "Environmental adaptation," Harlan countered immediately. "Many predators show increased neural plasticity in captivity. It's a survival mechanism, not evidence of sentience." "I anticipated that response," Avira replied, gesturing for Stran to activate the next display. "Which is why we've been documenting behavioral evidence as well." The hologram shifted to show footage of Karos performing a series of tasks that required not only intelligence, but understanding of abstract concepts, sorting objects by color and shape, using tools to retrieve items, and most impressively, creating symbolic representations of objects that were hidden from view. "Impressive conditioning," Harlan conceded, though his tone remained skeptical. "But still within the parameters of advanced animal cognition." Avira took a deep breath. It was time for their most compelling evidence, the documentation that Stran had been gathering during her absence. "Stran, please bring Karos to the main room," she requested, "and prepare for the communication demonstration." Harlan stiffened. "Is that wise? Your own protocols suggest—" "My protocols are designed to protect Karos from those who see him only as a dangerous predator," Avira interrupted. "What you're about to witness requires a different understanding." Stran disappeared down the corridor, returning moments later with Karos padding beside him. The massive Raxid moved with careful precision, his luminous eyes fixed warily on the strangers, but his demeanor remarkably controlled. The security officers instinctively reached for their weapons, but Harlan held up a hand to stop them, his attention captured by the unusual sight of a fully grown Raxid voluntarily following a human. "Karos," Stran said clearly, making a specific gesture with his hand. "Greeting ritual." To the astonishment of Harlan and his team, Karos immediately performed the formal Aurinian greeting sequence, a complex series of movements that culminated in a respectful bow toward the inspector. "A trained performance," Harlan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps," Avira acknowledged. "But what about this?" She moved to a display panel, and activated a program that showed a series of abstract symbols. Karos, identify home. The Raxid studied the display, then deliberately pressed his paw against a symbol that represented a dwelling. Food, Avira continued. Karos selected another symbol. Danger. A third selection, this one made with particular emphasis. Harlan watched, his professional skepticism visibly eroding. Symbol recognition is impressive, but it's more than recognition. Strand interrupted, stepping forward. Watch this. He displayed a new set of symbols that Karos had never seen before. Karos. Where would you find water? The Raxid studied the unfamiliar symbols, then selected one that resembled flowing lines, a logical choice for representing water. He's not recognizing established patterns, Avira explained. He's interpreting meaning based on visual logic. That requires abstract thinking. She could see Harlan processing this information, his worldview visibly shifting as the evidence mounted. But the defining moment came next. Strand produced a small device that emitted a series of harmonic tones. As the sounds played, Karos responded with his own vocalizations, complex patterns of purrs, rumbles, and clicks that seemed to mimic the harmonic structure of the tones. What you're hearing, Avira explained, is a form of communication that we've only begun to document. Raxids use these sonic patterns in the wild to coordinate hunting and territorial behaviors. But Karos has adapted them to communicate with us. To demonstrate, Strand made a specific sound pattern, and Karos responded by retrieving a particular object from across the room. Different patterns elicit different responses, Strand added. Not through conditioning, but through mutual understanding. We're effectively speaking his language, and he's learning ours. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even Harlan's officers were watching with expressions of wonder rather than vigilance. If what you're suggesting is true, Harlan said slowly, it would constitute a major reclassification of the entire species. That's exactly what I'm proposing, Avira confirmed. And it's the subject of my presentation to the council tomorrow. She met Harlan's gaze directly. Which is why taking Karos for invasive testing would be not only scientifically counterproductive, but ethically indefensible. Harlan considered this for a long moment, his bureaucratic mind clearly calculating the political and professional ramifications. Finally, he straightened his uniform with a sharp tug. I will need to consult with the council before proceeding further, he announced. In the meantime, the specimen, he paused, correcting himself. Karos will remain here under observation. My team will stay to monitor and verify your claims. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a significant concession. Avira nodded her agreement. We welcome the opportunity to provide further evidence. As Harlan stepped away to communicate with his superiors, Strand moved to Avira's side, Karos settling at their feet in a protective posture. That was brilliant, Strand murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You've just changed the course of Raxid-human relations forever. We did, Avira corrected him, acutely aware of how much Strand's observations had contributed to their case. I couldn't have done this without you. Their eyes met, and in that moment of shared triumph, something shifted between them, a recognition of connection that transcended their professional collaboration. The moment was interrupted by Harlan's return. The council has agreed to postpone any decision regarding the Raxid until after your presentation tomorrow, he announced stiffly. Chairperson Lorne himself will be monitoring the proceedings. Avira nodded, relief washing through her. Thank you, Inspector. Don't thank me, Harlan replied with a hint of his former sternness. I still have significant reservations about the implications of your research. If your presentation fails to convince the council, the original extraction order will be enforced. With that warning hanging in the air, Harlan stationed his officers at strategic points around the facility and withdrew to establish his temporary monitoring post. Left alone with Stran and Karos in the main laboratory, Avira finally allowed herself to exhale fully. That was closer than I'd like to admit. Stran nodded, absently stroking Karos's head as the Raxid pressed against his leg. Bureaucrats like Harlan see only what their regulations tell them to see. Showing him the truth was the only way. The truth, Avira echoed thoughtfully. That's what tomorrow is all about, isn't it? Forcing them all to see the truth about species like Karos. Not just about Karos, Stran said, his gaze intense. About how we define sentience, intelligence, the very boundaries between them and us. He smiled suddenly. But first, I think our friend here deserves a reward for his excellent performance. Avira couldn't help but smile in return. Let me guess. Another bath. He did seem to enjoy the first one, Stran replied with a grin, as they led Karos to the bathing area, carefully avoiding Harlan's watchful officers. Avira found herself contemplating how much had changed in just a few days. She had left for Mars expecting to present controversial research. She was returning to defend not only her work, but the very nature of the creature she had come to love. And somewhere along the way, she had found an unexpected ally in Stran, a human whose understanding of interspecies connection matched her own. Whatever tomorrow brought, she was no longer facing it alone. The preparation for the council presentation consumed the night hours. Avira and Stran worked side by side, compiling data, organizing visual evidence, and rehearsing key points. Karos remained with them throughout, occasionally contributing to their work by demonstrating behaviors on command for recording purposes. The council will want to see reproducible evidence, Avira explained as she reviewed their materials. They won't accept anecdotal observations, no matter how compelling. Stran nodded, manipulating a holographic display of Karos's neural activity patterns. These comparative scans are our strongest scientific evidence. The growth in the cognitive centers is unmistakable, even to skeptics. But the behavioral demonstrations will make it real for them, Avira added. Numbers and brain scans are important, but seeing Karos communicate, reason, create, that's what will change minds. Throughout their work, Harlan's officers maintained their vigilant presence, observing every interaction with professional detachment. Harlan himself periodically checked their progress, his expression gradually shifting from outright skepticism to reluctant consideration. Your presentation begins at 800 hours, he reminded them as the night deepened. I expect absolute transparency regarding your methods and findings. You'll have it, Inspector, Avira assured him. All we ask is that the council approach our evidence with an open mind. When the final preparations were complete, Avira found herself mentally and physically exhausted, but too keyed up to rest. Stran persuaded her to take a brief break, leading her to the observation deck that overlooked the volcanic valley below her home. The Aurinian night was in full splendor, the twin moons casting silver light across the landscape, while bioluminescent flora created rivers of gentle color along the valley floor. In the distance, steam vents released occasional plumes that glowed with mineral content in the moonlight. It's beautiful, Stran said softly, standing beside her at the railing. I've visited dozens of worlds, but there's something special about Aurinia. It's the intersection of extremes, Avira replied, grateful for the momentary distraction from their impending challenge. Volcanic heat and glacial peaks, deadly predators and delicate crystal flowers that shatter at a touch. She glanced at him. Earth must seem very tame by comparison. Stran laughed quietly. Earth has its own extremes. They're just more subtle sometimes. His expression grew thoughtful. That's what drew me to interspecies work. You know, finding the connections between seemingly incompatible life forms. Like humans and Raxids, Avira suggested with a small smile. Like humans and Aurinians, he countered, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her heart race unexpectedly. Before she could respond, a soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The moment broken. Avira activated her console to find Chairperson Lorne's official seal preceding his message. Xenobiologist Avira. The chairperson's weathered face appeared on the screen. I have reviewed Inspector Harlan's preliminary report on your research. It is intriguing enough to warrant the Council's full attention. Avira straightened, aware that this was no mere courtesy call. Thank you, Chairperson. However, Lorne continued, his expression grave, I must caution you about the implications of what you're proposing. If Raxids are reclassified as sentient, it would trigger mandatory reviews of all research involving predatory species across 17 worlds. The economic and scientific disruption would be considerable. The underlying message was clear. Powerful interest would resist such a dramatic shift in policy. With respect, Chairperson, Avira replied carefully. Scientific truth must take precedence over administrative convenience. If predatory species possess levels of cognition and culture that we've previously denied, our ethical obligations change accordingly. Lorne studied her for a long moment. You sound like an advocate rather than a scientist, xenobiologist. The best science has always advocated for truth, sir, she countered, even when that truth is inconvenient. A hint of what might have been approval flickered across Lorne's ancient features. Present your evidence, Avira. The Council will judge its merits fairly. The communication ended, leaving Avira and Stran exchanging glances of cautious optimism. He's giving us a fair hearing, Stran observed. But warning us about the resistance we'll face, Avira added. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. We should rest. Tomorrow will demand everything we have. Morning arrived with uncommon clarity, the twin suns rising in perfect alignment, a phenomenon that occurred only once every 60 days on Aurinia. Avira chose to take it as an auspicious sign as she made her final preparations for the presentation. The communication suite had been transformed into a broadcast center, with Harlan's team setting up official council verification protocols to ensure the integrity of the transmission. Avira stood at the central podium, surrounded by holographic displays, ready to project her evidence to the assembled council members, light years away. Stran took his position nearby, with Karos resting calmly at his feet. The Raxid seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, his usual restless energy contained in a posture of alert stillness. Transmission activating in 30 seconds, the technical officer announced. Verification protocols engaged. Avira met Stran's gaze across the room, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. He gave her a slight nod that somehow conveyed everything she needed in that moment. Support, belief, partnership. Council chamber connected, the officer continued. Broadcasting now. The main screen illuminated to show the Mars Council chamber in all its formal grandeur. Dozens of representatives from throughout the solar system sat in tiered seating, with Chairperson Lorne presiding from the central dais. All eyes were fixed on the screen that now showed Avira's transmission. Xenobiologist Avira, Lorne began, his voice carrying the weight of formal authority. The Council recognizes your emergency appeal regarding the classification status of the Raxid species. You may present your evidence. Avira drew herself up to her full height, her voice clear and steady as she began. Honored Chairperson, distinguished Council members, I come before you today to present evidence that challenges our fundamental understanding of predatory species cognition, with specific focus on the Aurinian Raxid. She activated the first display, showing comparative evolutionary charts. For generations, we have classified predatory species primarily by their ecological impact rather than their cognitive potential. This classification system has served important conservation goals, but it has also created blind spots in our understanding. Over the next hour, Avira methodically presented her evidence, neural scans, behavioral studies, communication patterns, and most compellingly, live demonstrations with Keros that showcased his ability to understand abstract concepts, communicate through multiple modalities, and even create simple representative art by arranging colored stones in patterns that depicted objects from his environment. Throughout the presentation, the council members' reactions ranged from skepticism to astonishment. Several leaned forward in their seats during the communication demonstrations, particularly when Keros responded to complex verbal instructions with appropriate actions. "What you are witnessing," Avira explained, as Keros completed a sequence that demonstrated understanding of numerical concepts, "is not conditioned behavior. It is reasoning, communication, and cultural learning, the hallmarks of what we define as sentient cognition." Chairperson Lorne, who had remained impassive throughout, finally spoke. "These demonstrations are indeed remarkable. Xenobiologist. However, they represent a single specimen raised in unusual circumstances. How can we determine if these capabilities are inherent to the species or merely anomalous developments in this individual?" It was the question Avira had been anticipating and preparing for. "An excellent point, Chairperson, which is why we've undertaken comparative studies with wild Raxid populations." She nodded to Stran, who activated a new series of recordings. These were captured in the volcanic regions of northern Aurinia, where Raxid populations remain relatively undisturbed. The footage showed wild Raxids engaging in complex social behaviors, coordinated hunting that involved apparent role assignment, communal care of young, and most significantly, a ritual that involved the use of volcanic hot springs and mineral deposits. "What you're seeing," Avira explained, "is a bathing ritual that appears to serve both physical and social functions. The minerals in these springs enhance coat health, but the behavior extends beyond mere grooming. Note the specific sequences, the social hierarchies expressed through order of entry, the communication patterns." She highlighted a particular sequence where adult Raxids guided younger ones through what appeared to be a learning process for the ritual. "This is cultural transmission," she continued. "Knowledge passed from one generation to the next through demonstration and guidance, a defining characteristic of sentient species." A murmur ran through the council chamber as the implications registered. Lorne leaned forward, his ancient eyes sharp with interest. "If what you're suggesting is correct, xenobiologist, the Raxids would qualify for protection under the Sentient Species Conservation Act." "That is precisely our contention, Chairperson," Avira confirmed. "And it necessitates a complete re-evaluation of how we interact with, study, and manage Raxid populations." At this point, Inspector Harlan stepped forward, having remained silent throughout the presentation. "With the Council's permission," he interjected, "I would like to address some regulatory concerns." Lorne nodded his assent, and Harlan continued. "While the evidence presented is compelling, reclassification would create significant challenges for ongoing research and ecological management programs. The predatory nature of Raxids poses genuine safety concerns that cannot be dismissed." "If I may respond," Strand spoke for the first time, his calm voice drawing all attention. "The designation of predator and sentient are not mutually exclusive categories. Earth's historical record includes numerous species, wolves, orcas, certain primates, that combine predatory ecological roles with complex social structures and intelligence." He moved to stand beside Keros, resting a hand on the massive creature's shoulder. "What we're advocating is not the elimination of management protocols, but their evolution to accommodate our expanded understanding. Predatory sentients require different approaches than non-sentient predators, approaches that respect their cognition while addressing legitimate safety concerns." The council chamber fell silent as the members considered this perspective. Finally, Lorne spoke again. "This is a matter that requires careful deliberation. The council will recess to consider the evidence presented." The transmission shifted to a holding screen, indicating that the council was in private session. Avira exhaled slowly, the tension of the presentation finally releasing its grip on her shoulders. "You were magnificent," Strand said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Both of you." He included Karos in his glance, and the Raxid rumbled a soft response that sounded remarkably like satisfaction. "We've given them something they can't ignore," Avira agreed. "Whether they choose to act on it is another matter." Harlan approached them, his expression unreadable. "Regardless of the council's decision," he said stiffly, "I must acknowledge the quality of your research. Xenobiologist. It is more substantial than I initially believed." Coming from Harlan, this was high praise indeed. Avira inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Inspector." The wait stretched to nearly an hour before the transmission reactivated, showing the council chamber once more. The members had returned to their seats, and Lorne's expression was grave as he addressed them. "Xenobiologist Avira," he began formally, "the council has reached a preliminary determination regarding your appeal." Avira straightened, her heart racing. "The evidence you have presented regarding Raxid cognitive capabilities is sufficient to warrant a full species reclassification review," Lorne continued. "Pending the outcome of that review, all invasive research protocols involving Raxids are hereby suspended. Your specimen," he paused, correcting himself, "Karos will remain under your guardianship, with regular monitoring by authorized observers." Relief washed through Avira, but Lorne wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the Council is establishing a special research initiative to expand our understanding of predatory sentience, with particular focus on the cultural and communicative aspects you have documented. We invite you to lead this initiative, working in conjunction with a diverse team of specialists from multiple worlds." This was beyond what Avira had dared to hope for. Not merely protection for Karos, but a fundamental shift in how the interplanetary community approached predatory species. "The Council recognizes the significance of your work," Lorne concluded. "It challenges our assumptions and expands our understanding of consciousness itself. This is science at its most profound, revealing the universe not as we expect it to be, but as it truly is." With those words, the formal session ended, though individual council members immediately began sending messages of congratulation and interest in collaboration. As the communication suite returned to normal operations, Harlan approached Avira one final time. "My team will be withdrawing," he announced. "Official observers will be appointed within the week to monitor your ongoing research." His tone had shifted from suspicion to something approaching respect. "I am reassigning myself to serve as liaison for the Council's new initiative. If that is acceptable to you." Avira blinked in surprise. "Of course, Inspector. Your regulatory expertise will be valuable." With a formal nod, Harlan departed, leaving Avira, Strand, and Karos alone in the suddenly quiet room. "Did that really just happen?" Avira asked, a smile of disbelief spreading across her face. "It did," Strand confirmed, his own expression mirroring hers. "You've changed everything, Avira. Not just for Karos, but for countless species across the galaxy." "We changed it," she corrected him, reaching out to take his hand in a gesture that felt both natural and significant. "I couldn't have done this without you," Karos rumbled softly, nudging both of them with his massive head in what could only be described as affection. "I think he's claiming some credit, too," Strand laughed, scratching behind the Raxid's ear frills. "As he should," Avira agreed. "After all, he's the one who had to endure being covered in suds for science." Their laughter filled the room, a release of tension and celebration of possibility. As they stood there, the Orinian scientist, the Earthborn handler, and the Raxid who had brought them together, Avira felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the universe had aligned in ways she could never have predicted, but now couldn't imagine differently. In the days that followed, their work took on new dimensions. The Council's initiative brought researchers from across the galaxy to Aurinia, eager to witness Karos's abilities firsthand and to develop new protocols for studying predatory sentience. Avira found herself at the center of a scientific revolution, her home transformed into a hub of interspecies research. Stran remained by her side throughout, his unique understanding of animal cognition proving invaluable as they expanded their studies to include other Raxids. Under the Council's protection, they established a sanctuary in the volcanic valleys where wild Raxids could be observed without interference, their natural behaviors documented with new appreciation for their complexity. The most dramatic development came when they discovered that Karos's communication abilities extended to his wild counterparts. When introduced to a small group under controlled conditions, he demonstrated a remarkable capacity to translate between the humans and the wild Raxids, facilitating a form of cross-species dialogue that had never before been possible. "He's a bridge between worlds," Stran observed as they watched Karos interact with a female Raxid who had cautiously approached their observation post. "Just like us." Avira glanced at him, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. "Is that what we are, bridges?" "Isn't that the best thing to be?" he replied, his hand finding hers in what had become a familiar gesture. Connecting what was separate, helping different worlds understand each other? She couldn't argue with that perspective, especially as she reflected on how much her own world had expanded since Stran had first appeared at her door with his container of bath suds and his fearless approach to her ferocious pet. 6 months after the Council hearing, they stood together on the observation deck of their expanded research facility, watching as the twin suns set over the Raxid sanctuary below. In the valley, several Raxids were engaging in their bathing ritual, their purple fur gleaming in the fading light. "The Council's final report comes out tomorrow," Avira said, leaning slightly against Stran's shoulder. "Full sentient status for Raxids, with all the protections that entails, and a new classification framework for evaluating other predatory species." Stran added, "Your work is changing how we see intelligence across the galaxy." "Our work," she corrected him, turning to face him fully. "I've been thinking about that, actually, about partnerships." Stran raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Have you now?" "The research center is expanding again," she continued. "The Council wants to establish a permanent interspecies communication division. They've asked me to direct it." "That's wonderful news," Stran said warmly. "You deserve it." "They've also approved a co-director position," Avira added, watching his expression carefully. "Someone with expertise in practical animal handling and communication development. I suggested you." Surprise flickered across his features, followed by something deeper. "Are you asking me to stay, permanently?" "I'm asking for more than that," Avira replied, her voice softening. "I'm asking you to build something with me. A center, a research program, a life." She took a breath, then added, "Unless Earth is calling you back." Stran's smile widened as he took her hands in his. "Aurinia feels more like home now than Earth ever did. And as for building something together..." He glanced toward the facility, where Karos could be seen observing them from the window, his intelligent eyes following their interaction with evident interest. "I think we've already started, don't you?" As the last light of the suns faded and the bioluminescent flora began to glow across the valley, Avira and Stran sealed their new partnership with a kiss that bridged their worlds just as surely as their work bridged the understanding between species. Behind them, Karos rumbled his approval, a sound that somehow managed to convey both satisfaction and affection. From a simple act, a ferocious pet covered in suds by a human stranger had grown a revolution in understanding, a scientific breakthrough, and a connection between two beings from different worlds who had found in each other the perfect complement to their shared vision. And as night fell over Aurinia, the future stretched before them, as bright and full of possibility as the star-filled sky above.